On September 16, 2022, 22-year-old Mahsa Jina Amini died while in custody of the government's morality police for wearing improper hijab. This sent shockwaves throughout Iran. A massive protest movement commenced in response as Iranians demanded justice for Amini and equal rights for women. However, the recent protests represent just the latest chapter in the enduring story of the women's movement for equal rights in Iran. My name is Sydney Martin, and I'm the program manager and a researcher here at the Iran 1400 Project. I recently conducted interviews with a variety of scholars about the woman life freedom movement. Here's what they had to say.
And it's really only after we contextualize it into this history, into its proper history, that we can truly appreciate the momentous event that the women life freedom movement represented, and the watershed event that it has been, again, not just in the history of the people of Iran, but in history of humanity.
With every political crisis or political upheaval in Iran that's been in place in the last 100+ years, women's issues have actually been part of those. That women have either been participated or the people who are contesting with each other for power had their different takes and were articulating them.
The Iranian women's movement, I mean, some have said, including Farzin Milani, Dr. Milani, who's at the University of Virginia, she believes that the beginnings of the women's movement in Iran go back to 1848 when Tahireh, who was a Babi Baha'i, removed her veil in public in front of some 80 men, which, you know, we say this very casually, but we have to put this into context. I mean, I would liken that to today having at a very important conference a woman walking in there literally nude. You know, I mean, the context is really important. What Tahireh did in 1848 is tantamount to that kind of an action today. But why she did that, why she removed her veil, and she said it very loudly, she declared that it was today that is the day, meaning in 1848, she felt that the world had reached a point where it was time for the emancipation of women. Since then, Iranian women have not relented. They have had small or large various movements in which they have continually asked for their equality with men and for their human rights. Fundamental human rights.
The first episodes of organized engagement of Iranian women in the country began in the 1870s. This involvement continued until the constitutional revolution occurred from 1905 into 1911, ultimately resulting in the creation of a parliament in Iran. During the revolution, women actively engaged in boycotts, protests, and other resistance efforts.
First, the constitutional revolution was a theoretical attempt, but it was institutionalized to bring democracy to Iran. But because the social soil, so to speak, was not ready for democracy, it did not really was not able to strengthen its roots and develop its roots. And soon it sort of failed, even though it was a very good practice for democracy. And the idea of democratic institutions were broached in Iran for the first time. And the public sort of became familiar with such an idea that it could be different forms of polity, not only the monarchy, the absolute monarchy.
The ideas that the constitutional revolution introduced went hand in hand with the women's movement in Iran. Many women recognized the potential of political organization in the country and leveraged the revolution's momentum to advocate for women's rights. They established secret societies where they discussed a variety of women's issues, and they grew increasingly aware of the oppressive conditions that women faced in Iran.
However, later, with the advent of the first Pahlavi monarch in 1925, Reza Shah, another way of preparing the consciousness of Iranians for a modern world was implemented. Reza Shah was not a Democrat. There was no doubt about it. But the reforms that he instituted, little by little, saw the seeds of the modern person in Iran, the modern personality.
In the early 20th century, in 1936, the then Shah of Iran, Reza Shah, by force mandated an official unveiling of women, where overnight women were no longer allowed to leave their homes with the traditional Islamic hijab.
Although the forced unveiling in Iran is often perceived as a progressive action, it lacked the act of choice for women in the country. It benefited mainly urban middle-class women, as many religious women refused to leave their homes without their hijab and were thus prevented from going out. Additionally, many women's groups that emerged after the Constitutional Revolution were eventually shut down by Reza Shah, as he did not permit independent organizations in the country. However, still, under his reign, women's concerns advanced in other domains, such as education and legal reforms.
Iran very quickly moved to a Western-style democracy, or kind of democracy. It wasn't really a democracy. It was a constitutional monarchy. I know that there's reasons to criticize that government for some of the political complications and lacks of freedoms that certainly did exist in society, but in the general scope of things, the condition of women was certainly very much improved.
With the second Pahlavi, all of these expanded much more. The economy became much more industrialized, higher education expanded, education was expanded, urbanization was expanded. Women participated more in society, which is also gives them a sense of agency. And the military was expanded tremendously, which the contradictory impact that it had. But nevertheless, it gave Iranians, I call it, inchoate agency, not complete agency.
Women's organizations emerged once again under Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. And although he cracked down on political organizations after the 1953 coup, women's organizations attached to his central government remained active. This influenced the direction of women's initiatives until the Islamic Revolution. According to scholar Ali Akbar Mahdi, during this period, the government centralized women's organizations, unified their leadership, and depoliticized their demands. However, despite the Shah's modernization, he was still a repressive leader, and a protest movement began to form against him in 1977, with many women playing an active role. Despite eventually overthrowing the Shah, however, the demands that many, if not most women were fighting for during that period did not come to fruition. Rather, the revolution was co-opted by the clerical establishment, which began taking steps to Islamize the country.
Even prior to the 1979 revolution, there's been decades of what we call sort of a gap between the public, what the public have wanted, and what the regime has delivered to them. And what that has meant is that the public has been in demand for greater democracy, greater political representation, and the institutions are not there to really be able to sort of support this.
Following Ayatollah Khomeini's declaration that women must adhere to Islamic dress code, including wearing the hijab, a protest against compulsory veiling took place during March 1979 on International Women's Day. Unfortunately, this protest did not succeed, and the Islamic Republic subsequently introduced a range of Sharia laws in the country. These measures included segregating men and women in schools, restricting women in certain occupations, passing regressive laws, and more. However, of course, the women's movement still continued.
In the mid-2000s, there was an effort by women who tried to get elected into the parliament and become a part of the government in order to pass certain laws to give women more rights and freedoms. Some of that was effective because at some point the age of marriage was raised from, I think, 9 to 13 years old. Other measures were taken for women's rights in terms of divorce and family matters. And it was done through the government. It was done through the parliament. But unfortunately, there's so few women in the parliament who are willing to go up against what they need to go up against, which is, insurmountable odds.
Throughout the ensuing decades, numerous protests and social media campaigns emerged to promote women's rights and voice opposition against compulsory veiling in Iran. These efforts reached their climax with the Women Life Freedom Movement, marking the most significant women-focused demonstrations in Iran to date.
But this might be the first one, I'm going to say in Iran and perhaps anywhere, where concerns over the welfare of women have been front and center. It's the leading concern. It's what drives the discussion. It's sort of top of the agenda, not second, third, and fourth in the agenda. And therefore, in a sense, women's visibility, women's activism, women's presence in society, their civic power is more on display now than perhaps at any other time. And
I've not seen something like this take hold in such a profound way across the world in terms of the Middle East movement on social media and other places. I think in the first couple of months, in the first month, I think by the end of October 2022, the Persian hashtag had 350 million tweets on it, which for context is, I think, 100 million more than the word Ukraine had in the first 6 months of that conflict.
For over 4 decades, many Iranian men were watching helplessly, with rage, the terrible treatment of of women, their daughters, sisters, mothers, wives, in the hand of the security forces. The quiet or open support that the Iranian men, many of them, are now showing towards women who have taken off their veils in public places, in restaurants, in stores, in exhibitions, in wherever they go. Despite the government functionaries being present, in my view, are sure signs of this transformation in people's vision about this basic human rights of women.
I would say that the most positive impact of the Women Life Freedom Movement in Iran has been the increased awakening of the population to the plight of women, and the fact that so many women are now going to public places without their hijabs, despite the continuation of the repression and the laws against the violation of hijab rules. The fact that women and men together joined in these protests is highly significant. In this movement, the issue of defending women's rights has been tied in with opposing gender and state violence, opposing the death penalty, opposing mass incarceration, and opposing authoritarian education and censorship.
The movement has generated a new lexicon of resistance and meaning of protest. Women Life Freedom is a conceptual framework for a broader form of perspective on social change and political resistance in Iranian society.
So the fact that women are the pioneers of this movement, the youth generation Z and others are in the forefront of this movement. They clearly demands of their rights, reclaim their dignity, zan, zindagi, azadi. All of this actually shows that these ideas and discourse and values are deeply rooted in society.
I mean, I think it's a quite astonishing achievement. They've moved the needle in terms of social norms. As I say, they are now walking around in the streets without the hijab. And even though the government is threatening to crack down and is, looking to pass a new law which is going to crack down, this is something that if someone had told me 18 months ago that many women would be walking around the streets in public in Iran without the hijab, I simply would not have believed them.
The movement also has fueled a cultural shift by mobilizing Iranians to confront cultural patriarchy. Individuals are stepping forward to challenge this type of patriarchy, cultural patriarchy, even when it lacks state support. This cultural shift is significant, I think, as it targets both systemic and sociocultural patriarchy, which often reinforce each other.
While its intensity has waned since its inception, the Women Life Freedom movement remains vibrant as it marks its 1-year anniversary, prompting discussions about what lies ahead for Iran.
One cannot predict entirely, but it's very likely that that the women have won the battle, even though they have not won the war for gender equality and rights, and the right to wear what they want in public, the hijab or not in public.
I mean, we need that liminal period, liminal time, and transitional time to be able to really manifest and materialize the new ideas. And I think it's not, also it's relevant for the case of Women Life Freedom. I think it created a dialogue, at least a dialogue between the different voices inside and outside country. But for really materializing, I think we need more time, more organization, and more unification of different ideas and different voices.
We have to understand this movement differently in that it is happening very much across the country in the bodies of the people who are on the streets, who in their daily lives are living the kind of life that they are imagining for themselves. It's coming in minute and small ways of opposing the ways that they're countering, whether it's restriction in terms of social freedoms, political freedoms. And I think we have to sort of switch our understanding of how this movement's ultimately going to, in the long term, transform Iranian realities in ways that are not readily, perceptible. They are happening there in minute daily ways and really expressed through people's actions and bodies.
I think for the Women's Life Freedom movement to succeed in terms of ideas and discourse, we need to have a more comprehensive understanding of the linkage between freedom, democracy on the one hand, and social justice on the other hand. No democratic movement with no elements of social justice, especially in the global south, is going to succeed. We really need to have a very comprehensive understanding of justice, gender justice, economic justice, and of course, political justice and freedom. So that's what we really need to do that.